Hey everyone, I'm Jay, and in this video we'll be taking a look at the CSS grid and building a fairly simple but also robust Holy Grail layout. So kind of simple. We will be doing a few things in the grid though. So let's get started. First, we have some content here all made up already. I have a header element with an H1 that says header in it, so we can clearly see what it is when we get there. I have an aside element. This is going to be for the left side, then a main, and then another aside that's for the right, and then a footer element. And all these have some text in there to tell you what they are. I'm not too worried about what's in them because I'm really just concerned with the layout of this. So I have some style over here. I am going to use the CSS designer a little bit here to put my selectors in place. But I'm going to leave the code up here on the left and then the view on the right hand side. So the first thing I need to do is actually turn the grid on. All these elements that are part of my grid, or that will be part of my grid, are located in the body element. For larger websites than this single page, that would not be the case. There would be quite an extensive amount of elements, but for this example, the body element is going to be the parent grid. So let's head over and create a selector for the body. Right. There we go. And grid is not really one of these options here, right? There's a lot of grid settings that we have available, but none of them are actually in here, except for the first one is going to be display grid, but then grid is not even a choice that Dreamweaver gives me. So what I'm going to do is type in all of these. I'm going to check off the show set and hide all the extra stuff that I don't have set. I'm just going to start typing in my styles for the grid. So display grid. All right. And immediately not much is going on. And that's because we have not actually defined any of the sections of our grid. So when the grid is just called out, it's going to be a single column and then however many rows the grid is. So what we're going to do is kind of like a spreadsheet. We're going to tell our grid to have however many columns we want it to have and also however many rows we want to have. All right, so columns raise vertically, but they go across horizontally. If you're having trouble remembering which one is which, I always think of the columns in the ancient Greek buildings there. The columns go up and down, but you stack them side by side, right? And then the rows must be the other thing. Okay, the rows go across, and then you stack them vertically. And so we are going to define our columns and our rows, and then we're going to define what goes into our columns and rows, because you'll see that we actually need to say, okay, here's our columns and rows, and then we have to say where those elements fit into our columns and rows. Because in the Holy Grail layout, our header goes all the way across, and our footer goes all the way across. And in the middle, we have two sidebars and a main middle area. But when we define our grid, we're actually going to have a 3x3 grid. And we have to tell our header to go all the way across all three columns in the top row, and our footer to go all the way across all three columns in our bottom row. So let's go ahead and do that. The way we're going to do that is first the columns, and it's called grid template columns. All right. No, I didn't have a typo. All right. CSS designer is going to yell at me and say that's not a thing. Well, that's not true. So I'm going to type it directly into my code here. Grid template columns. And the way I want my columns to go, and I'm thinking about that middle section where the sidebars and the main are, because that's going to be where I see my columns. When the header and the footer are concerned, I'm not going to see any difference in the width of the columns, but grid template columns allows us to define the width of each of our columns. So I have 3 columns, and I could just say auto, auto, auto. And what I'll get is 3 columns, and the width will be automatically figured out based on the content. I have very small content in here, so the width should be 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3, or 33%, 33.3% for each one. And for some layouts, that will be fine. What I want to have is my main middle area actually be bigger than my sidebars. So I'm going to take out auto for my columns, and I'm going to use something called FR, or 1FR. That's a fractional unit. What the FR is going to do is, if you have any determined widths, like if I had 200 pixels, for example, and then 1FR will be 1 fractional unit of the remaining space. So if I have multiple FRs, 1FR, 2FR, and 1FR, what's going to happen is that left column is going to be 1 fractional unit, the middle column will be 2 fractional units, and the right-hand column will be 1 fractional unit. And I don't have any absolutely defined widths in here, so there's no 100% or anything like that, or 100 pixels, sorry. So there's nothing like that, so there's only fractional units. I have a total of 4 fractional units, so 25% of the available width for each fractional unit. So the left side gets 25%, 1 fractional unit. The middle section gets 50%, or 2 fractional units. And then the right-hand side gets 25% for that remaining fractional unit. And that's how my columns are going to be displayed all the way across, and then they rise up and down. You can mix and match these however you like, but for the Holy Grail design today, that's how I'm going to build that. Next, we're going to define the rows. Now, again, I could say auto, 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 and what's going to happen is there will just be 3 rows, 1, 2, 3, and their heights will be automatic. Well, I want my header and my footer to be automatic. I actually do. I want them to be only as high as they need to be for both the header and the footer. In some layouts, you may want the header to be a specific size, but in my case, I want it to just be automatically however high it needs to be based on what its content is. But what I really want is, after the header and the footer get their automatic height for the row, I want all the space that's left, or 1 fractional unit remaining, to go to that middle row, so that really the most of my available area is into the middle. Now, nothing has changed so far, and that's because my body element by default doesn't have a height set. So I'm going to come in and set the height, or I'm actually going to set the minimum height to 100% of the viewport height. you'll see not too much has changed here, and that's because I haven't actually organized my which goes into which blocks. And you'll see that instead of setting the height for my body, I like to set the minimum height. I'm not actually going to add any more content, but if I did, I do want that content to be able to stretch and scroll like a normal web page should. So I use minimum height is set to 100% of the viewport height. And that way my page will never be smaller than what the user can see. And I won't have any blank space at the bottom of the screen. So this is my body. I'm going to give it a background color. Okay. What I like to do if I'm setting the background color is actually use background color and not use the shorthand, because I'm not setting all those other things. I only want to use the shorthand background if I'm setting all the available options, because then it becomes a little more difficult in the future to override those options if I have used the shortcut. And then because this is the body, and by default the body element does have a margin and or padding, I forget which one, I'm going to set both of them to 0, a unitless 0, because 0 of any unit is the same. 0%, 0 pixels, 0 EM, they're all the same. So you can put no unit when you're writing 0. And then that should be all right. Now let's define which items go where in my body element. And before I can define which items go where, I actually have to name those items. So what I'm going to do is start with the header and work my way down. Okay. And the header element will get named. Right? And the way we name it is an area in the grid. So the way we name it is by using grid area. And I'm just going to call it header. Okay. So this one's called header. Let me fix my spacing here on my tab. And I'm going to copy and paste this all the way down. So I have header, and then an aside, main, aside, footer, and then I'll go ahead and change the names. Aside, main, second aside, aside, this next one is going to be last of type. So all the asides get this code, and then only the last of type gets the second one. And so this aside is going to be called left. The main is going to be called the main. The last aside is going to be called right. And the footer is going to be called footer. You'll see that as I'm typing this, all my elements in my screen are getting kind of smushed down over here, and that's because they don't have, I've not put all the names into my grid yet. So I have named everything. Now I have to tell the grid where each of those names appear in the grid. And that's going to be called, these are the grid areas that I've named. So grid template areas. And the way we do this is a little bit unique. So I'm actually going to go on to the next line so it makes a little bit more sense for me. And then I'm going to use quotation marks, and I'm going to type in those names in their grid spaces. So the header is going to go all the way across all three columns on top. So header, 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 all the way across. And then hit enter and do the next row. It's going to be left, main, right. And then the last row, footer, footer, footer. And then put my semicolon at the end, and there we go. Now I have a header. It goes across the top, if I click into my spaces here, you can see where they're at. There's the header, left, main, aside, and footer. So I put those in there one more time here. I named them, named each grid area using the CSS rule grid area. Give it a name. It doesn't have to be header, right? I could call it anything I want. I could call it stinky face if I wanted to. I would just have to write stinky face a lot of times. And then when I tell the grid template where the areas go, that's called grid template areas. And then you put each row in quotation marks, and you put each item in where it goes. And if I wanted to skip an item, right, I just put a dot in its place, and I'll have that header, put a dot in the second place, and now my header, there we go, is only in the first row, third column. It doesn't extend into the other ones. I just put a little dot right here, and it went over there. It did not. It doesn't extend. It leaves that part blank if you do that. And so we've done that. What I want to do is put colors to everything. All right. So I actually have one or two colors that I'm going to use here. I want to give it colors. Background color, green for the header, green again for the footer, and then for the main, I don't really want cyan there either, but that's okay. For the main, not green again, this one is going to be a brown color. And then for the asides, we're just going to change this cyan to gray and make a very dull and boring layout because I like it. But now I can see all my spaces very well. And let's try this dot over here again. Let's hide part of the header over there. We'll put part of the header over there, and we could say now the header doesn't stretch all the way across. The aside doesn't go all the way up either. Okay, this is just blank. If I were to give a color to the aside and say that this is going to be, let's say that the asides are gray. There we go. And the body is just white there. No color. I can extend and kind of do whatever I like to move these things around. Once I have all the columns and rows, the width of the columns and the height of the rows have been defined, and all the names have been given to each one. And don't pay much attention to this coloring of the left and the header right here in the main. Coloring is just because I'm using common words to name these things. That's all that is. And you're allowed to name them whatever you like. So far, I have not run into issues with naming them anything because it's in CSS. Not a big deal. Let's open this up in our browser and just have a quick look at things in our browser. I have my responsive browser window set to 1000 pixels wide and 800 pixels high. That way I can kind of hover over here and I can see exactly the width and height, and it's an easy number to work with. So the header width all the way across 100%, 80.866 and so on pixels high. That's the automatic height for the header here based on what the height of an H1 is, plus its padding and whatnot, its margin and all that. And then I come to the aside, and the first one, it says it's 250 pixels wide, and at a page of 1000 pixels, that's right, because remember we set that to 1 FR, we set the main to 2 FR, and then the other side is 1 FR. And so 1 fractional unit of a total of 4 fractional units should be 25%, or 250 pixels on a 1000 pixel screen. So that works out just right. 500 pixels for the main, 250 pixels again for the other side, and then the footer down here, 1000 pixels all the way across as it should be, and then 50 pixels high. That one does actually just have a paragraph tag, and its padding and margin that's built into it. No styling, just whatever's built into it. So that is a little bit shorter than the header at the top, but very well. Let's see, anything missing on here that I wanted to look at? I think that's pretty good. We can put our own padding in here. Right, we can put padding, and that's not going to add to, it's not going to mess up our sizing of anything. In my classes, we do quite a lot of Holy Grail layouts, and in previous Holy Grail layouts, we have had some issues with paddings stretching beyond their parents' borders. That is not the case with grid elements. Right? The grid elements, they do have their borders very well and very clearly defined, assuming you've done it right. And so you don't have that issue with padding stretching outside of the borders of the parent element. All right, so that is our basic Holy Grail grid layout with a minimum height of 1 screen height, 1 viewport height. Have a look at our elements again really quickly. And that is it. Thanks for watching.